Welcome to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. This week is Common Sense Environmentalist Week. In the second half of our show, Patrick Allett, professor of American history at Emory College and author of Climate of Crisis, America in the Age of Environmentalism, will take us through the good, the bad, and the ugly of the extraordinary success we've had cleaning up after ourselves. Up first, we're excited to welcome Chuck Leavell, longtime keyboardist for the Rolling Stones, and an award-winning tree farmer who served on the board of the American Forest Foundation and the U.S. Endowment for Forests and Communities. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Hey, Bill, how are you? Hey, I got to tell you, man, it's a real pleasure and honor for me to be talking with you. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks for taking time out of your touring to talk with me. You know, Chuck, there's no shortage of celebrities who use their fame and fortune to preach one cause or another, but it's a bit more rare to find one who actually practices what he preaches. You've taken to the cause of sustainable forest management. That's what I want to talk to you about today. And it's an issue where there's a lot of opportunity to carve out common ground across a wide political range. What sparked your interest in environmental stewardship and a country life that's so far removed from the glitz of rock and roll?
Well, it's all my wife's fault, Bill. The fact is, my wife, Rosalane, and by the way, Rosie and I have been married now for 42 years,
wow.
So it's been an amazing relationship. Rosalane's family has been connected to the land for generations, literally, as farmers tending cattle and also tending forest land. And so she comes from a heritage of stewardship of the land. Bottom line is that in 1981, her grandmother passed on and left her a fairly significant parcel of land. It was about 1,000 acres.
Mm-hmm.
So it became our responsibility to learn about this and to sort out how we were going to go forward with our own version of stewardship. And I can tell you that we investigated all kinds of things. What she inherited, first of all, was a diverse farm. There was some cattle, there were some row crops, and there was some timber. You know, I realized rather quickly that the row cropping and cattle farming was going to be very difficult for me if I wanted to continue to pursue my musical career,
Sure.
because it would either take too much day to day or require, hiring managers and all of that. So I gave all kinds of thought to nut trees, pecan trees, peach trees, fruit trees, nursery stock.
Mm-hmm.
But the more I thought about long-term sustainable forestry, and the more I realized what trees and forests do for us, not just the products they give us, but clean air, clean water, home for wildlife, and all of that, the more interested I was in that. And there was another personal connection, Bill, and that is, hey, where does that marvelous thing that has given me a career and so much joy in my life, where does it come from? It comes from the resource of wood and so many other musical instruments. So that was a real personal connection.
Wow. Help us put modern forestry in perspective. When European settlers arrived in America, they somehow managed to chop down just about every tree between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mississippi River, transforming primordial old-growth forests into farmlands. I think the tide turned maybe a century ago, and there's been a great deal of reforestation, particularly in the Northeast. Where are we when it comes to forest coverage across the continent today?
Well, it is quite interesting, and you are absolutely right. During the years of that early settlement, forests were cleared for agriculture, to make homes. They were cleared eventually for building railroads and such. And we did not do such a great job of managing our forests during those years. So the turnaround began somewhere around the era of Theodore Roosevelt, Gifford Pinchot, John Muir. I think the country realized as a whole, and also our leaders, the ones that I've mentioned and others, realized that, hey, we're doing more harm than good. We have to turn this thing around. And so that sparked, first of all, the creation of the National Park System and the beginning of preserving some lands for aesthetic purposes. And also with leaders like Gifford Pinchot and Carl Schenck, who were two really important figures in forestry in particular, because they had been in Europe, they had studied forest management, and they brought those thoughts and techniques to America, and they began to teach others these techniques. And so then we began to replant the forest, and since that time, we've done a pretty darn good job.
If you look at the numbers, they're pretty impressive. So there's a bit of a fringe benefit in all this reforestation in that my understanding is that young forests support a wider diversity of habitat and fauna than old-growth forests. Is that correct?
From what I've learned, Bill, you want all of the above. Yes, you want some young forests. They actually, in some cases, sequester more carbon, for instance, than old-growth forests do. But, of course, we want some beautiful areas to be preserved, for us to enjoy, for us to study and to learn from. In terms of diversity, I think that changes over time. So, what you see after a clear cut and a new forest is planted in the first, say, 5 to 10 years. And by the way, it also depends on where you're talking about. Obviously, forests in California are going to be a lot different from the forests that we have in Georgia or wherever. So it's a complicated answer. There's no simple answer to it. But in my opinion, again, I think it's so important that we maintain a diversity of forests and also that we pay attention to what is indigenous to our regions.
I don't know how many people have experienced seeing an old-growth forest or close to it. I was in college the first time. We went camping at the top of the Smoky Mountains. I have seen trees there for the first time bigger than I ever imagined. It's quite an impressive sight.
Absolutely. And, when you go to Muir Woods, for instance, out in California and walk those beautiful, beautiful redwoods, it's a spiritual experience. And I can tell you, in my area of the country, of course, the original forest before European settlement was mostly the longleaf pine. And then you also had in Appalachia the magnificent chestnut trees, which, as you know, were wiped out by a blight that came from China. And just to jump subjects real quickly, the American Chestnut Foundation has just done an absolutely amazing job in research and certain breeding techniques and genetics to begin to bring back the chestnut tree. The most successful technique that they have is breeding a 15/16 American chestnut with a 1/16 Chinese chestnut. That 1/16 gives it some resistance to the blight. And I've been working with ACF for a number of years. We've probably planted about 30 chestnut trees on our place, and I'll be planting some every year going forward. But they have a marvelous goal, Bill, of planting over 1 million chestnut trees over the next 7 years. And I think they're going to meet that.
Wouldn't that be something? Well, Chuck, give us a little more flavor for the business of the Charlane Plantation. Is it economically self-sufficient, or do you need to support it with your entertainment earnings?
Well, I have to be honest and say that if I didn't have another source of income, it would be difficult. I'm not going to say it would be impossible, but it would take somewhat of a different approach than I'm able to take, because I do have other income. We all know that since the market crash of 2008, especially in the wood industry, housing, of course, we're connected to the housing industry, has caused a downturn in the markets for wood. That's the bad news. The good news is we have seen these cycles before. We are seeing an uptick now, and we're also seeing the introduction of some new markets for wood. For instance, one new market that we have, and it doesn't come without some degree of controversy, is energy. In the Southeast, we're seeing a lot of new, what they call pellet plants pop up, especially near the coast. And these wood pellets, which are processed wood, mostly coming from low-grade wood and from the slash that comes along with the forestry operation. In other words, the limbs, the twigs, the things that are not going to be used for lumber. They're being processed into these wood pellets, and for the most part, they're going to Europe and all across Europe to meet their mandate of what they call 2020, 20% renewable energy by the year 2020. In addition, of course, to wind and solar, and we know that Europe is somewhat ahead of the United States in this faction, they are using biomass, and that's what these wood pellets are being used for. And Bill, I got to tell you, why we're not doing more of that in the United States bewilders me, because this is a renewable resource. It's carbon neutral, it's natural, it's organic, and we need to be doing more biomass in this country.
So, Chuck, what's the difference between tree farming at the scale you practice it at Charlane and commercial forestry that supplies our nation's lumber and building material?
Really, it's a matter of scale, Rosalane and I are very privileged to have close to 3,000 acres of land. That, it sounds like a lot of land, and I suppose it is. But when you look at the scale of a Plum Creek or a Weyerhaeuser or International Paper or other institutional landowners, and by the way, that also goes to pension funds and profit-sharing funds and trust funds and whatever. It's just such a larger scale. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of acres of resource rather than, 2,000 or 3,000 acres. So scale is one difference. Another difference is Rosalane and I take a longer-term view. We not only want to use our wood products, to make lumber. And by the way, it's a great feeling when you do a harvest and you're sending trees to the mill that are going to go to build somebody's first home, or they're going to renovate somebody's home, or they're going to make books and magazines and newspapers, or they're going for packaging products or whatever it may be. It's a really good feeling to know that you're engaging in that. But not only do we want to get the products off of our property, look, I would like nothing better than hopping on my horse and riding through the woods and seeing the deer and the turkey and the quail and hearing the songbirds. So there's aesthetics involved from the perspective of a private landowner in addition to the product.
Sure. Well, the list of conservation awards you won for Charlane is pretty impressive. Go ahead and brag on yourself a little bit here and tell us about them.
Well, you're very kind. In 1999, Rosalane and I were selected as the National Outstanding Tree Farmers of the Year. Now, that's given by the American Forest Foundation through one of their programs called the American Tree Farm System, ATFS. And this was out of some 60,000 landowners across the country that are engaged in this program. So it was a real pat on the back and a very, very nice thing to be awarded that. We've had some other awards that have been very nice, but more than that, the importance is the advocacy of going out and talking to groups, which I do, public speaking with various conservation groups, forestry groups, or groups that may not know so much about these issues. Also engaging with government officials, with our leaders. I've testified on 2 farm bills and engaged both in the state of Georgia and throughout our southeast region, as well as up in Washington, D.C., and really, to be honest, across the planet. We've made friends in Germany and in Norway and Sweden and Austria, and we're going to South America soon with the Rolling Stones, which I'm very pleased about, and I plan on making some trips during the off days to see some of those forests down there.
Wonderful.
So, it's just a real joy and a real honor and pleasure to be able to engage and see how different owners, how different countries, different regions work their forest land.
So, Chuck, some environmental activists can often seem at odds with active forest management, seemingly preferring untouched wilderness to productive use. You call yourself a common sense environmentalist. What does that mean?
Well, you're right, Bill. There are people out there that would say, never cut a tree. That is strange to me, because when you think back on the history of mankind, from the eons of time, humankind and forests have been engaged with each other. We've used the resource of the forest for so many different purposes. Again, let's, number one, remember, this is a renewable resource. It grows back. And if you manage it properly, if you manage it sustainably, I always say, if we take care of the forest will take care of us.
Well, the expression is it grows on trees, right? I mean, what's more renewable?
Do we want to be careful about this? Of course we do. Do we want to make sure we have protected areas, that we don't harvest trees, so that we use it for research and learning, and we use it for aesthetic purposes, just to walk through a beautiful forest? There's a great quote that I like to tell people, and that is Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "In the forest we return to reason and faith." And I love that quote, and I feel that way when I'm walking in my forest. So I want to make sure that we have these protected areas, but we also need areas for production so that we can take wood products and build homes. And by the way, one of the great new things being done now in technology, of wood technology, is that we're able to build multi-story buildings, 13, 15-story buildings out of laminated wood product.
Wow.
Now, you think about that. Let's talk about that a second. First of all, what it takes to make a product like steel or concrete is much more damaging to the environment than it is to process wood. Number two, that wood that is going for these purposes to build homes is continuing to sequester the carbon as long as that wood exists. So when you think about building a multi-story building, office building, or shopping center, or whatever it might be, out of wood products, you're continuing to sequester carbon as long as that building exists.
Forest management can be quite complex. What role do tree farmers play in combating invasive species like the pine beetle or kudzu?
This is a huge issue, Bill. I mean, huge. Anyone that has seen the damage of the mountain pine beetle, say from Colorado on north up into Canada, especially in British Columbia, there's been literally tens of millions of acres lost to this insect. It's just devastating. Again, forests are resilient and they're already beginning to grow back from this devastation. However, the reason that we think, and most of us think, that this is happening is, guess what? Climate change. Those insects have always existed, but they've been held at bay by weather, by cold weather, and so that they go through a cycle of being suppressed for a number of years, and then maybe you have one warm year where they have more activity. But because we've seen so much warmer temperatures all across the planet, it gives these beetles an opportunity to multiply and to do what they do. So this is a big concern. In the southeast, we have the southern pine beetle, which is a terrible damaging insect. Fortunately, we haven't had any major outbreaks in a number of years. We always look for this to happen, and there are techniques that you can try to keep them from spreading. But look, emerald ash borer, sudden oak death syndrome, there's a lot of problems that exist out there that are challenging for those of us that are trying to look after our forests. And also, Bill, is no big secret what's been happening with the wildfires in our country. Again, I think that's twofold. One is climate change is a part of it, but two, lack of management.
Chuck, that reminds me, I wanted to ask you, I grew up listening to warnings from Smokey the Bear about preventing all forest fires, which were considered an unmitigated evil, but hasn't our understanding of forest fires evolved a little bit, that more frequent, smaller fires are important for forest renewal?
You bet that is the case. Absolutely. No, the total suppression of fires has been a problem across our landscape in America. The Native Americans, Bill, used fire to their advantage, especially in the Southeast. They used it to help clear the forest for hunting purposes, and they realized that it helped control certain scrub oaks and undesirable growth, and it helped encourage natural weeds and grasses and legumes that are important for wildlife. So they learned this a long time ago. And of course, out west where you've seen some devastating fires, lightning fires used to clear the forest from time to time. So good old Smokey, they changed the phrase from only you can prevent forest fires to only you can prevent wildfires. And that's the important thing. There's a difference in a good fire and a bad fire. So, yes, we are learning more and more, and I would like to see more forest management in that regard.
Chuck, I understand you're also a hunting enthusiast. What role does hunting play in maintaining healthy forests?
Well, again, forests are the home and shelter to most wildlife as we know it. Everything from non-game species, songbirds and so forth, to game species. Again, I think mankind has been connected to hunting and to forests for the eons of time, so I think it's a natural thing to do. Look, I'm not a big game hunter. I don't really advocate that. I guess some people might like to engage in that. For me, what I love mostly is what we call upland bird hunting. Quail, grouse, pheasant. I enjoy wild turkey hunting. We are blessed with a very strong population of white-tailed deer in our area, so taking a deer to put on the table. You mentioned earlier a common sense environmentalist. Well, I'd like to say I think I'm a common sense hunter. I'm not going to go out there and slay animals just for the sake of doing it. I like having some deer meat in the freezer and to feed it to our guests that come from time to time. And certainly there's no better eating bird than a quail, in my opinion. So I enjoy that kind of thing. But again, I think you have to look at why do we do this? Well, we spend more time and money to make sure those animals are there than we do spending time out there chasing them.
Speaking of guests, have you ever taken Mick Jagger hunting?
It wouldn't be his thing, man. No. The guys have never been at my place. We tried a couple of times to arrange while we were on tour to have enough time, say from Atlanta to come down to my place, which is about 2 hours. But unfortunately, the circumstances have just never quite allowed it, so they've never been. But, maybe one of these days we'll get them out there. I'd love that.
It's amazing that at our age, you guys can still keep this up.
We're as surprised as anybody. I got to tell you, it's Keith Richards really says it. We're in uncharted waters. We don't know how long this can go on. We have absolutely no idea. But, the fact is, man, and I think that any of the 750,000 people across North America that saw this last tour earlier this year in 2015 would tell you the Rolling Stones have never sounded better. And I'm not saying that to just promote it, but I'm telling you, I've been with this outfit for 33 years, and it's a lot better sounding and a lot tighter band and a lot better presentation than it was when I first started. And I think really the prevailing attitude, Bill, is that how blessed are we that we still get to do this and that people still want to see it,
Chuck, as a fellow sexagenarian, I hope you keep it up forever. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
A real joy, man. Thank you for having me, and good luck to everyone out there listening.
That was tree farmer extraordinaire Chuck Leavell from the Rolling Stones here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. You can check out Real Clear Radio on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at Real Clear Frezza. And stop by RealClearMarkets.com, my go-to place for diverse views on political economics. Real Clear Radio Hour is a not-for-profit, donor-supported program. Please stop by realclearradio.org and hit the donate button or contact us to become a corporate supporter. Ahead, Patrick Allett, professor of American history at Emory College and author of Climate of Crisis, America in the Age of Environmentalism, joins us to look back at the heritage of our environmental movement. Stay tuned.